Just a reminder of lab safety tips. Use your common sense and don't be stupid, as mentioned in another video. But also, during these times, at least the time of the recording, be cautious during a pandemic, which means, well, face masks should be worn in class at all times. But during labs, since you are really close to other people, face shields are also required. So that is true. If in doubt, ask the instructor. But I am overly paranoid about this, so most likely you'll be wearing face shields in that class longer than other lab classes.
All right, face shields. We are still in a pandemic, and you will be working very closely with someone else. While you are next to someone, I do expect you to wear a face shield. I know that they are a nuisance. If you need to take it off because it's fogging up or for whatever reason, back away from your group to take it off. But if you're next to somebody, please wear the face shield. You should have printed out the lab that looks something like this. What you're going to be handing into me in a week.
Our labs usually due like a week from when we have them?
They are due traditionally the next time we have labs.
Okay.
So there are exceptions, obviously, potentially at the very end of the semester, might be an exception to that. Generally, the place where it makes a difference is the test probably will be on lab days because we got the full hour and 50 minutes.
Yeah.
And so the lab that we do the week before that would be due the week after the test in that case.
Okay.
So it's the next time we have lab, unless there's some exception to it.
So today's lab's due Friday?
Next time we have lab, next Wednesday.
Oh, the next lab, okay.
Yeah.
A week. Right.
But if you have it done by Friday, I'll take it. It's okay to submit early. The way that handing in goes, I generally don't ask for things. I just assume that if you have it, it will be put up here. Now, where's the stack form? Wherever the first person puts it down. That's where the stack is. It's within reason. If the person puts a stack and puts his paper on the back floor back there, it's reasonable to assume people aren't necessarily going to see it. You'll be handing this in to me. If there were a graph, I would expect the graph also to be handed in. It was not an issue till I think 2 years ago, and then suddenly I had a class that thought, well, I'm supposed to do the graph, but it doesn't say I have to hand it in. So when you hand this in to me, where it says name, I'm expecting your name. It needs to be enough to identify you. It's not a formal thing, so first name is fine as long as you're the only person in the room with your first name. Group name. When you get in your group, you will decide upon a group name. All of you need to agree upon the group name. And when I say agree, I'm expecting uppercase for uppercase, lowercase for lowercase, space for space, spelling for spelling. A number of years ago, there were two groups. One group sat here, one group was right behind them. One group had a name of group, which is nothing wrong with that. Another one had the name of group. These are two different names. The first time I saw this and I thought, okay, that's fine. Then I saw that and I thought, well, I knew they sat near each other, and I thought, well, that's odd. It's not like them to misspell it. They're usually pretty careful about that. And then I noticed there were two more of these and two more of these. There were two groups of three, and they had talked about doing that. This joke has been done now, so if you did it, it would just be derivative and sad. But those are two different names. That is a different name. However you want to pronounce it. That is a different name. Those are 4 different names of groups. So when I'm talking about they need to be the same, they need to be the same. Now, typically, the biggest issues I see with that are, one, somebody didn't write it down and then suddenly they're handing it in, they're going, I don't know what the group name is. Asking me what your group name is, probably not the most efficient way of doing it. But if somebody in your group has handed it in already, I can look through, well, first I'll say, who is in your group? And sometimes they get the response of, I don't know their names, which might be a problem. Eventually it gets ironed out, but please make sure you know what the group name is. The other issue with groups, there was a group that was sitting over here and they came up with a group name. Now, at some point, about halfway through, one member of the group was over here setting up for the next bit, and the other three were sitting waiting for it to be done. This is basically only one person needed to be doing it at that point. At which point, one of the people who was sitting here said, "Oh, I got a great group name," and he said it, and the other two agreed. And so all three of them wrote down what the new group name is, and they never told her. So when I'm looking at it, I eventually go, okay, I know she was part of this group right here, but her name is different, so she gets deducted through no fault of her own. Actually, I think in that case, I said, come over here and change this. That, just make sure if you change the name after you figure out what you're gonna use, make sure everybody in your group knows. The group name does not actually have to be an actual word. Thus, example. The groups, when you're making up, I'm not gonna break up the groups. I'm not gonna tell you how to make up your groups. And I will intervene only if we end up with a group of 5 and a group of 3, I'm gonna ask someone from the group of 5 to move over if you haven't done it yourself. But I don't intervene in how groups are made unless I have to. The reason for this is the people that you are working with today are not necessarily the ones you are working with next week or the week after. These are not set groups. The way that I know who work together is by the group name. Also, I am not hovering over you to make sure you're writing everything down correctly. If there are 3 people in the group, I'm assuming that the majority is correct. There have been 2 cases in which I knew that the person who wrote down the thing that was different from everybody else was correct. But that is just because I just happened to overhear it and I happened to remember when I was grading. Don't expect me to remember it. I do expect all of your data within the group. Everybody in the same group should have the exact same data. In other words, that which is measured directly from the lab should be the same. So if I have people and I have 4.0, somebody writes down 4.0 for a value, someone else writes 4.0 and someone writes 4.1, I'm going to assume that this person is wrong. Again, there are 2 exceptions where I actually knew that the person in the minority was correct, but I'm assuming this person is wrong. If there are 4 people in the group, there is no majority, everybody takes a deduction. So some groups, before they break up, before they leave, they go, let's just make sure we have all the same data. And somebody reads it out and everybody just checks. There are no calculations involved, this is measurements that are done. Now, why things get messed up, and it is possible that the 4.1 is correct. Well, bad number right there for this demonstration, but some of the numbers that get confused, what is that?
It could be a 9, it could be a 4.
And possibly it's a 6 too, depends on if, you just didn't loop it far enough.
That's a squiggle.
Yeah. So, if you were copying down someone's data, and there's nothing wrong with that, if you're doing the measurements over here and you're calling it out and someone else is writing it down, the person who's writing it down should have good handwriting, or be able to go back and write down what it actually is. If you're copying someone else's down, so the person is calling it out, comes back over and starts writing down the numbers that he or she just called out, and then you get some things like this where the person might look at it and go, oh, well, it's clearly a 9 when it actually intended to be a 6. So let's say that 3 members of the group, I got 9, I got the 6, and I got the squiggle, and I have to figure out what this is. I then go through and look at all the other 6s and 9s that this person has done, trying to figure out which one it is. If I still can't tell, I will go to some person who happens to be walking by and I say, what do you think this number is? And that will be the tiebreaker. There are times, more often than I'd like, where I get 3 people in the group and somebody has 4.0, somebody has 4.1, and somebody has 4.2. I'm going, I thought they worked together. They all have the same group name. I remember them all sitting right next to each other during the lab. This kind of thing shows up when you do a trial and then you go back and you redo it. And suddenly it's a situation of one person forgot to erase, flashing back to the group. They sat over here a number of years ago. Never had any group disagree on the data as much as that group did. On top of that, they all seem to have some form of dysgraphia, the worst handwriting collectively as a group Nice guys, but their handwriting atrocious. 7 and 1 are also. Is that a 7 or a 1? Well, some people put the serif up here for the 1, and some people don't. Some people, I try to put a cross through my 7s just so it's clear it's not the differentiate between the two. But you know, you have your handwriting that you've developed over how many years. So if you're sharing data numbers, please make sure that you know what you're sharing.
Some additional rules for the informal reports: don't repeat units. And so what I mean by that is what is in parentheses here is understood to already be after each of the numbers that follow in that row or column. And so this right here is wrong because it's understood there's meters after it. So this would actually be 4 meters meters or 4 meters squared. And that would not be a length then. So this is inappropriate. Also, if you decide to do it sometimes and not other times, just to let you know, if you did this, I would take off 2 points for that. If you did this, I would take off 3 points because you're not even being consistent with it. So just please be aware. Properly, don't put units down here because what is in parentheses already is assumed to be after it. So you don't have to rewrite it. Now, if there are no units after this, if I left this blank, then you could put units after it. So if this were length 4.0, 3.0, 2.0, 2.5, then you can put units after here or put units in parentheses. Now, one place for my labs often ask for percent error or percent difference. For whatever reason, I don't think I have ever put the percent sign in parentheses here, so you need to add it. So in a case like that, that is not appropriate. The percent error is 5%, so please make sure you include the percent sign, or you could squeeze it in here in parentheses if you wish. I did have a student years ago who created what I considered the following snowman. The student was writing the number 8 all the way down the page. She was repeating it over and over again because of the nature of that particular lab. And so first one started out fine, then it started to sort of tilt. So the next time the top 0 or top circle was starting to tilt farther, farther, farther. At some point it's no longer an 8, and I think I made the call somewhere around there, and I started taking off because those are not numbers. That's closer to infinity. So just please make sure your numbers look like numbers. Even if you have to repeat it, take the time and care. Again, part of the lab is attention to detail. This is a detail.
Results. On this lab right here, I would expect the results to all be the same because I care about significant digits on this lab. After this lab, there might be more variation in it depending upon where people round. But the results involve calculations or some sort of manipulation of data. I will grade it out to however far you take it. After this lab, once this lab, significant digits matter, so I care about how far you can take it out. But after the first lab, let's say it's 4.713, and one person does 4.713, it will be 6 if that person did it correctly, 216,894, just because that's what their calculator has. I will grade them out that far. I'll grade this person out to here. I'll grade this person out to here. If you give me the full number, I need to be able to match it. If I can't get your same number, then a deduction.
I do expect proper rounding. Part of the lab is attention to detail, and this is part of it. So if I'm rounding off to the 3rd decimal point here, and please make sure I can see the decimal point. If I'm rounding off to the 3rd decimal point, I look at the number after it, and then if it's bigger than 5, I round up. Lower than 5, I round down. So here would round up to 4.346. Here would round to 4.345. Both of those are acceptable. Don't round improperly, like in this case right here, where if I'm rounding off to the 3rd, ultimately to the 2nd decimal place, because this is less than 5, it should properly be 4.34. However, I have seen students who will round it off to this, which is appropriate to the 3rd decimal place, and then they'll round again. So, 5, they round up. So this is not appropriate because in the original number, it would be a round down. Now, if the next number is a 5, what do you do? I know that most spreadsheet programs that I have seen will always round up. 4.35 would become 4.4, just so that's rounding up, or it's rounding to the even number. Or you could also justify 4.3, which is rounding to the odd. The whole rounding to the even or to the odd is so when you are rounding, you, in theory, or statistically speaking, will always round up half the time and down half the time. There's no reason why you should always round up. Matter of fact, if you're in a business, if you're always rounding up, you can either be cheating someone or losing money, one or the other. What I would want you to do is either always round up, or always round to the even, or always round to the odd, whichever way you're going to do that. So 4.35 could be to 4.4 or 4.3. 4.45 could also be 4.5 or 4.4. If you round to the evens, those are your two answers. If you round to the odds, those are your two answers. And if you always round up, those are your answers. Although you could technically round down, I am going to forbid the always round down if the next number is 5 and there's nothing after it. So if I were rounding this one to this decimal place, this would be rounded up because that's a 5, but the number after that is not 0. And so what comes after that 4 is indeed bigger than 0.50. So that would be a round up. A couple rules about presentation of answers: only one fraction bar per unit, only one fraction bar per numeric answer. Express answers in decimal form. If this is a lab, definitely decimal form. In tests or quizzes, you could express it as fractions, so this last one does not necessarily apply, but in labs, I do expect answers in decimal form. So if I have 5 newtons over 8 meters per second squared, the math part is 5/8, and the unit part is newtons over meters per second squared. This is not appropriate. Now, in a, again, quiz or test, I don't have a problem with that. That's definitely not acceptable for in any case. So you need to get rid of the extra fraction bar here, and in a lab, you need to get rid of the fraction form here. So 0.625. You have a calculator. If you don't have a calculator, use a slide rule, do long math, whatever you need to do, or ask somebody who has a calculator. And then the fraction, this was either newtons second squared per meter, and I would accept that, but that's also known as a kilogram, and so kilogram is fine, kilogram is fine. Now the 0 in front of the decimal, not particularly concerned about that. Just make sure I can see the decimal point. That's probably the bigger thing there. Also, kilogram, I have seen that before. That is not appropriate. It is a lowercase k followed by a lowercase g. Now, in a case like this, 8 centimeters over 4 centimeters, I should learn to do math, so that should be a 2. The units are centimeters per centimeter, and that is acceptable as an answer, but centimeters would cancel out, and so just writing the answer as 2 is perfectly fine. 2 centimeters per centimeters is unconventional. That it depends upon the point. I put a neutral face there. It depends upon the reason why you didn't take it to the next step. And then 1 over 4.3, never acceptable. 1, the decimal, it's like a built-in fraction bar right there. And so I consider that 2 fraction bars, even though physically it's not written as such, but that is not acceptable. Your answers are based on your work. So for example, if I gave you 2 plus 3 is equal to some number, then I take that number and subtract 2. Obviously the correct answer, 2 plus 3 is 5. Take that number, subtract 2, I get 3. Perfectly fine. Now let's say you have a moment and you write down 6, and do 6 minus 2, and then you write 4. I would take off 1 point for that because this is wrong, but this is correct given that answer. And this word right here is given. I write it so often that it is blurred into this mess, and that's probably more legible than some of the times I write it. But this is correct given that previous answer. However, down here, you get 2 plus 3 is 6, and then minus 2 is 3. I would take off 2 points for that because that's wrong. And that's wrong given that answer. And so you might see X given. So wrong given your previous answer. So even though 3 was originally the correct answer, it is not correct given this work right here. So your answers are based on your work. The analysis section, I forgot to do that in part of the other video. So it's okay to talk to your lab partners and other people about your answers. There's nothing wrong with that. I've heard some really incredible conversations among lab partners concerning the analysis. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. It helps the learning process. You do not have to agree on the answers, but your answers have to be based on your work and in your words. There was a situation where a graph was created and the 2 slopes were slightly different. Both people based their answers upon one of the people's slopes. So that was completely inappropriate. You're using someone else's work as your own. Officially, that's called cheating. So your answer is based on your work and in your words. I have seen, oh man, this is painful just to think about. I have seen one person's answers to the analysis questions, word for word, misspelling for misspelling, space for space, as someone else's answer. I do not play the game of who wrote the original answer and who copied, even though at some point I probably have a pretty good idea. However, both people are taking the penalty. If you ever see -5 as the number of points you get, that is -5 out of 6. In other words, you've lost 11 points there. If you ever see -5 written next to one of your analysis questions, then I am saying that it is your answer seems like it was copied off someone else's or someone else copied off of yours. If you see -5 at the top of the lab or any assignment, if you see that, there'll probably be a note saying, "See me." This means that I think that the work is not yours and we are having a conversation. And I think I covered that in another video. If you see it next to your work right here, you probably should see me. I probably won't write a note, "See me," but you probably should come talk to me. At the top of the lab, so in other words, for your overall grade, yeah, that's a serious thing and we're having a conversation. But bottom line, don't copy someone else's work. I think you have a good idea what's cheating. If it's a gray area, ask me. Now, a common question that shows up on a number of labs is, does the graph support the theory? Just saying that as one variable rises, the other one rises is not sufficient at all. Because if I have a graph here and I expect it to be a straight line, I expect a linear set of points. Saying as x gets bigger, y gets bigger, doesn't work because that also applies to this. That also applies to this. Also applies to that. So what I expect is, first off, saying also that the trend line is linear also doesn't cut it, because the trend line is going to be linear because you set the trend line to be linear. It's the default and you should not change that. The big question is, yes, it's linear, but how good does that line match the data points? And that is measured through the R-squared value. R-squared value equal to 1 is an excellent fit. Equal to 0, it's a horrible fit. And it's going to be somewhere in that range right there. If you have R-squared is equal to 1,000, I get really suspicious of that. And that's addressed in the video, so you should catch that elsewhere. I just get suspicious if it's perfect. Now, if it just says R-squared equals 1, then that could be the fact that you just got lazy and didn't take it out as many decimal places as you should have. So if I expect a linear fit, how close is the R-squared value to 1? Also, on a lot of the labs that are done, the intercept should be 0. There's at least one lab where the intercept should not be 0, but the intercept should be 0 on almost all the labs. And the two choices you have when doing the analysis on that piece is you're either running an equivalency test, which only one of the courses does, or I recommend the 10% rule. Now, there's a little bit of leeway there. It's kind of a rough and ready rule. But if I have a bunch of data points, so let's go back to a graph here, odds are it's not going to go through the origin. Most of the times I see it actually go through the origin, probably all but one case where I've seen it go through the origin. It's because people forced it to go through the origin. You don't want to do that. Don't force it. So I have data points here. So I've got a maximum value. Whatever that maximum value is there, is this less than 10% of that? So is the intercept less than 10% of the maximum dependent variable value? If it's under 10%, then it's probably close enough to 0. Another way of looking at it is, can you explain that? Are there enough eccentricities in the way the lab was conducted, or in just either the nature of the lab or what you did to explain that? So if you can easily explain it away, then that's close enough to 0. So these are the two things that, for the does the graph support questions, you need to address the R-squared value and the intercept. Now, in some cases, we know what the slope is supposed to be, and you can also do that comparison. There's an early lab, I think for most groups, where the slope should be equal to pi, and so you can also take a look at, is that slope close enough to pi? Or I have two graphs and the slopes should be the same, then another way that you can look at it. So, but these two always are going to be addressed, and this one in some cases.
The equipment. Oh, when you are done with the lab, please put things back. If you do not know where they go, please ask. That usually comes in and one person gets the equipment, brings it over, someone else is putting it away, doesn't know where it's supposed to go, and they just stick it down someplace. Then later on, when I'm looking for it, I can't find it because it's been put someplace bizarre. So please put the equipment away back where it's supposed to go. There was one class that was really bad about putting equipment away. I usually took it out on the next group I had, so don't make me do that. I acknowledged it, I apologized to them, but still, it put me in a bad mood. And you'll hear me say this many times, don't forget, rejoice, because this is physics. And if you finish the pre-lab,
The pre-lab, is that something you want us to turn in when we come in for that lab, or should that just be turned in with?
the pre-lab should be handed in when you come in.
Okay.
Now, for this lab is an exception because it's the very first one, and so today's pre-lab, I'm assuming will be handed in next week unless you have it done already, in
Right.
which case, look at all the other people who haven't done it yet and think, ha, I'm ahead of the game right now. And you celebrate the win.
All right.
And you haven't done it, you can look at the people handed in and say, I can't believe you rushed it. This takes time and thought.
Where was the pre-lab stuff? Because I was looking for it.
Pre-lab should be at the very last page.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I noticed,
Oh,
Another reason why I'm okay with it not being handed in right now.
For the pre-lab questions,
Uh-huh.
does it count off if we get them incorrect?
Yes.
So we need to look and, understand it.
That would be great.
Okay, just making sure. I didn't know if that was like a, hey, this is what we're gonna go over, if this is like, hey, I need you to know this.
Yeah, I mean, the lab has more weight than the pre-lab does,
Yeah.
but it can affect your grade.
Where do we look to get help for the pre-lab? Like, is there videos or text?
Well, in this particular case, the pre-lab, and when you go into labs, there should be the very top lab manual. If you click on lab manual, there's documents there which talk about how to use the micrometer and how to use the calipers and so forth.
So it's a link at the top of the lab?
Yeah, so when you go into the lab tab, right now there should be, I think there's lab manual and then there's the measurement and significant digit lab. I think that's the only two things there. So lab manual is a folder which takes you to a bunch of documents.